A stray dog wandering in the cold winter night, a faint cry from a dark trash can, and a decision that could change the fate of a small creature forever. What happened that fateful night? Why did no one stop, except for a homeless, ownerless dog with a great heart? This story will make you hold your breath, move you, and make you think about the power of compassion. Before we continue, please comment and tell us where in the world you are watching this video. And if you believe in touching stories, don't forget to subscribe now, because tomorrow there will be a special story for you. In a small, snowy town called Ashton, Oregon, there lives an elderly golden retriever named Bailey. But Bailey is no ordinary dog. No one strokes his golden fur. No one hugs his collar. No one calls his name. Bailey once had a home. He was the loyal companion of George Whitman, a former musician who made his living by his soulful music. They were inseparable, the lonely man and the dog with the big heart. But when George died, Bailey lost everything. No one in town wanted to adopt the old dog, and Bailey was left to wander the streets like a lost soul. But there was one thing those people didn't know. Bailey had never forgotten the streets he and George had walked. He refused to stay in the shelter. It fled, again and again, only to return to the same streets, as if searching for something it knew it would never find again. That night, it was especially cold. A cold wind blew through the alleys, rustling dry leaves. Bailey, his fur matted and eyes weary, trudged down the snow-covered streets. He was hungry. He was cold. But most of all, he was alone. But at that moment, in the darkness, a sound changed everything. A cry, fragile, weak, like a shard of glass about to shatter in the night. Bailey stopped. His ears perked up. The cry was unlike any he had ever heard before. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a stray cat. It was desperate. A cry for help. Bailey crouched low, walking slowly toward the sound. Its old feet stomped on the cold snow, leaving lonely footprints. It crossed the small path leading to Riverbend Park, where George used to play guitar in the evenings. A cry echoed from somewhere. Closer, closer. Then it saw an old trash can, quietly sitting under a dim streetlight. And right inside, among the trash and old newspapers, was a newborn baby. So small, so fragile. Its body was wrapped in a thin blanket, but it could not withstand the cruel cold of winter. Its small face was purple, its lips trembling. Each cry was a cry for help to this world, but no one heard it. No one, except Bailey. What would you do if you were Bailey? A small creature in need of saving, but you were just an abandoned person with nothing in your hands but the heart that was still beating in your chest. Bailey moved closer. He took a deep breath. A scent he had never known before, but something familiar. It was life. It was a tiny creature hovering between life and death. Bailey didn't know much about people. He didn't understand how anyone could abandon a child like that. But one thing he did know: he couldn't let this happen. Bailey's calm, brown eyes lit up. He lowered his head, gently biting the edge of the blanket with teeth that had weakened over the years. There wasn't much he could do, but he knew he had to do something. He had to get the child to safety. With all his remaining strength, Bailey lifted the child. The tiny blanket weighed heavily in his mouth, but he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. Every step Bailey took now wasn't just for him. It was for another creature, smaller, more fragile, more worthy of protection. Bailey started running. Can you imagine? A stray dog, old and tired, running through the night, through the snow-covered streets, carrying a newborn baby on the brink of death. Someone had seen him. A boy riding his bike by, mouth agape. A man standing on the side of the road, frowning in confusion. But no one understood what was happening. No one dared to come closer. Bailey ran, faster than ever. His breathing was rapid. His heart was pounding. But he didn't stop. He knew where he had to go. Eleanor Davis. The woman was the only one who had ever been kind to him, who had cared for injured strays. She lived in Sycamore, not far from here. She was his only hope. By the time he reached Eleanor's door, Bailey was exhausted. But he couldn't collapse now. He barked, 1, 2, then 3. Rapid, urgent, desperate. The door opened. At that moment, Eleanor looked down and saw the unthinkable, a stray dog carrying a newborn baby in its mouth. Her gentle smile vanished. Her heart pounded in her chest. She rushed forward, holding the baby, her hands shaking. The baby was still breathing, but very weakly. "Oh my God, Bailey, what have you done?" Bailey looked at her with tired eyes, but they were still shining with something. Hope. And Eleanor knew. The race against death had only just begun. If you followed this far, you're probably one of the few people who still believe in the furnace. Do you believe that a homeless dog can become a hero? Not by strength, not by magic, but by a simple thing, a heart that knows how to love. Bailey didn't know what was coming next. He didn't know that he was holding life and death in his hands with just a thin blanket. He didn't know that he was racing against time, against the cruel cold that was squeezing his small body. He only knew one thing. He couldn't stop. Bailey bit the edge of the blanket, his old legs straining to run like never before. Snowflakes crumbled under each step. His rapid breathing turned into white smoke in the cold air. But he didn't care. The newborn baby in the blanket was so small, so light, so fragile. And Bailey knew he had to find someone to help. Have you ever seen something strange, but hesitated to do anything? A boy was cycling down a deserted street. He almost crashed into a lamppost when he saw the sight before him. A stray dog, carrying a baby in its mouth. "What the hell's going on?" he stammered. But no one answered. Bailey passed a couple who had just come out of a restaurant. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. They just stood there watching as Bailey blew past like a gust of wind. Why didn't they do anything? Maybe they thought they were mistaken. Maybe they couldn't believe their eyes. Or maybe they didn't want to get into trouble. But Bailey didn't have time to wait for anyone to think. He had only one choice: keep running. In the cold of the winter night, a name flashed through Bailey's mind. Eleanor. She was the only person who had ever looked at him with eyes full of love. Remember last summer, when Bailey was injured by a speeding truck? When he was left on the side of the road, broken and exhausted? It was Eleanor who knelt, gently placed her hand on his head, and said, "It's okay, I'll help you." A gentle touch, a simple word. But to Bailey, it meant the world. And now, it was his turn to run to her for help. She lived not far away, in a small house in the Sycamore neighborhood, with a white wooden gate. If only he could get there. If only he could see her. Everything would be okay. Bailey was exhausted. His body shook, his breath ragged in his lungs. But when the white wooden gate appeared before him, he summoned all his remaining strength. He barked. 1 bark, 2 barks, 3 barks. The barks echoed through the night like an alarm, urgent, desperate, for help. The door swung open. Eleanor appeared, wrapped in a thick sweater, her eyes still showing traces of sleep. But as soon as she looked down, all sleepiness vanished. She stared, a stray dog, an old blanket, a baby. Eleanor's breathing was ragged. Her whole body was frozen. Her heart was pounding in her chest. No, it can't be. But Bailey just stood there, his old eyes looking at her as if he wanted to say something. A plea, a command, a fragile hope. Eleanor knelt, her hands shaking as she touched the blanket. It was cold. She pulled the fabric away, and as soon as she saw the baby's purple face, Eleanor knew she had no time to doubt. "Oh, God," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "Bailey, what have you done?" But this was no time to ask questions. The baby needed help immediately. Eleanor quickly pressed her hand to the baby's chest. A faint heartbeat. The baby was still breathing, but not for long. She ran into the house, dialing 911, wrapping the baby in a warmer blanket. "We need an ambulance now. A newborn baby, severely hypothermic." When the ambulance arrived, the sound of sirens shattered the silence of the winter night. Paramedics rushed out of the vehicle, and as soon as they saw the baby in Eleanor's arms, their eyes changed. "Get the baby in the car. This is urgent." Bailey stood there, watching silently as they took the baby away. He didn't understand what was going on. He didn't know that there were advanced medical technologies and highly skilled people who would do anything to save the child's life. It just knew it had brought the baby to the right place. Eleanor bent down and placed her hand on Bailey's head. She didn't need to say anything. Bailey could feel the gratitude, the emotion, and the warm love flowing through her fingertips. If you followed this far, you're probably one of the few people who still believes in compassion and that even the smallest creatures can create miracles. But the story isn't over yet. Who abandoned the baby? Will he survive? And what will happen to Bailey, the homeless dog who just became a hero? The story ahead is full of mysteries, and it will take your breath away. If you believe that all living beings deserve love, please like this story to spread it to more people. Because who knows, there may be other Baileys and other children out there waiting for someone to reach out and save them. But for now, get ready, because the truth is about to come out. Have you ever stood on the edge of life and death, watching a tiny creature fight for its last breath? That night, at St. Joseph's, no one could have guessed that a stray dog had just performed a miracle. The newborn, named Leo, lay on a white hospital bed, surrounded by the bright lights of the emergency room. His skin was pale, his tiny body trembling with severe hypothermia. Every second could be his last. Outside, Bailey waited. He didn't understand the medical equipment. He didn't understand the people racing against time inside. But there was one thing he knew better than anyone. He had to be here. Eleanor stood beside Bailey, her bony hand on his head. The warmth of her palm made Bailey feel a little more at ease. Suddenly, the door to the emergency room swung open. Dr. Adrian Wells stepped out, his face tense. "We're doing everything we can," he said, his voice hoarse with worry. "But Leo is very weak. He needs to be warmed up, his heart rate stabilized, and, with luck, he might pull through." Bailey looked straight into the doctor's eyes. He probably didn't understand every word, but he sensed the gravity of the situation. Could Leo survive? As news of the stray dog saving a newborn spread throughout the hospital, everyone turned to Bailey. Some nurses whispered, and some doctors were curious. Never before had a dog been the focus of such a life-or-death rescue. But not everyone looked at Bailey with appreciation. An animal control officer appeared, his eyes stern. This dog is a stray. We need to take it away." Eleanor immediately stood in front of Bailey, her voice firmer than ever. "He's not just a stray dog. He's a hero." Bailey stood there, calm but determined. At that moment, a voice spoke up. "Wait." Dr. Wells stepped forward, his eyes thoughtful. He turned to look at the emergency room door, where Leo was still fighting for his life. He took a deep breath. "We've never had any precedent, but I want Bailey to stay," he said. "Some patients need more than medicine. They need comfort." There was silence. The animal control officer opened his mouth to protest, but Eleanor spoke first. "How much time have we spent arguing instead of looking at what's most important? A stray dog did what none of us could. It saved a child." The room held its breath. Then somehow, the unprecedented decision was made. Bailey would stay at St. Joseph's as a therapy dog, at least until Leo was out of danger. A couple appeared at the reception desk. The woman's eyes were tearful, her voice choked with tears. "We are Leo's parents." All eyes turned to them. Eleanor frowned, and Dr. Wells looked at them suspiciously. Detective Ryan Carter, who had been assigned to investigate the case, stepped forward. "Do you have any identification?" The man replied immediately, "We don't have any identification with us, but please, let us see our son." Bailey growled. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Bailey sensed something was wrong. Dr. Wells looked down at Bailey, then back at Detective Carter. "What do you think?" Detective Carter clenched his jaw. He had seen too many cases like this. People exploiting a scandal for their gain. "I think we need to check," Carter said. "If they are Leo's parents, they should be able to prove it." The pressure of the interrogation increased. After a while of questioning, the woman began to stammer, her hands shaking. The man was sweating, his eyes darting. Finally, under pressure, they admitted the truth. They weren't Leo's parents. They had just heard about the case and wanted to pretend to be so they could get the reward money from the public. Eleanor clenched her fists, her eyes shining with pain. How could you do this to an innocent child? But at that moment, Bailey just looked silently toward the hospital room door. It knows this isn't over yet. There's still a truth to be revealed. Leo's story is no longer just about an abandoned child. It's about a secret no one knows about. Who is Leo's biological mother? Why was he abandoned on such a cold winter night? And can Bailey, the dog who made this miracle, help bring light to the truth hidden in the darkness? But first, Leo must live. If you followed this far, you have a big heart. Not everyone can take the time to listen to a story about compassion and the miracles that love can bring. Please share this story so it can reach more hearts. Because out there may still be other Leos and other Baileys waiting for a helping hand. But the story is not over yet. Get ready, because the truth is about to come out. Have you ever witnessed a life or death decision? A moment when a single action can change a person's entire destiny? That night, at St. Joseph's, the atmosphere was more tense than ever. In a room brightly lit by surgical lights, a newborn baby was fighting for his life. Leo. The baby had never known the warmth of a mother, never heard a gentle lullaby, and right now, a tiny heart was skipping a beat. "We're losing him!" A voice rang out in the emergency room. Dr. Adrian Wells nervously watched the heart monitor flash. Leo's heart rate was dropping. Hypothermia has been going on for too long. He can't maintain a steady heart rate. A moment of silence. A decision had to be made. Then, Dr. Wells whispered, as if talking to himself, the surgery must be done immediately. But that very sentence made his heart tremble. He knew what he had to do, but his hand, the hand that was once called the miracle of the operating room, was trembling. Because a year ago, he had failed. Have you ever carried a deep fear within you? A pain that, no matter how much time passed, you still could not forgive yourself? Dr. Wells was once a famous surgeon, especially in the field of pediatric cardiology. But a year ago, he had failed to save a child with a similar condition to Leo. The surgery lasted for hours, but in the end, the child did not survive. Since that day, every time he stood in front of the operating room, the image of the lifeless eyes of that child appeared again. He was afraid. He no longer believed in himself. He no longer dared to operate on a small heart. But now, another life was waiting for him. Would he dare face the past? As Adrian stood silently in the hallway, Eleanor stepped forward. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. Adrian, this is your chance to save a life and overcome your fear. He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with emotion. But what if I fail again? He said, his voice choking. Eleanor smiled slightly. Do you know anyone who is never afraid? Adrian shook his head. Bailey. Eleanor looked toward the hallway, where Bailey sat silently, not taking his eyes off the hospital room door. That dog didn't hesitate for a second to save Leo. He didn't think about failure. He just thought he had to do the right thing. She squeezed Adrian's hand. What about you? A deep breath. Then, for the first time in a year, Dr. Wells nodded. He would operate. Meanwhile, in another corner of the hospital, Detective Ryan Carter was receiving shocking news. They had found Leo's biological mother. Her name was Vanessa Thompson, a 16-year-old girl. Can you imagine? A young girl, just a child, forced to make a decision that even adults would not dare face? When Carter entered the room where Vanessa was sitting, she cowered, her eyes filled with fear. We know the truth, Vanessa, Carter said softly. You are Leo's mother, aren't you? Vanessa looked down at her hands, small hands that bore a terrible burden. She burst into tears. I had no choice. She choked, her shoulders shaking. I was pregnant. I was scared. I didn't dare tell my parents. I didn't know what to do. Carter listened silently. I didn't want to abandon him, Vanessa said through tears. I went back to the park to look for him, but he was gone. She covered her face, sobbing. Please, tell me, is my baby alive? Carter clenched his jaw. He knew a boy was still fighting inside the operating room, and the answer was still uncertain. In the operating room, time seemed to stop. Adrian stood there, gloves on. Everything around him fell into absolute silence. Begin. The scalpel touched flesh. Leo's heart, small, fragile, yet strong, was exposed to the doctor's watchful eyes. The boy had only just arrived in this world, but he had already fought so hard. Adrian felt his own heart pounding, but this time, he didn't let fear overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, and then he began to do what he was born to do. Do you believe in miracles? After hours of tension, the doors to the operating room slowly opened. Everyone held their breath. Adrian stepped out, his eyes tired but shining with hope. He looked at Eleanor, at Carter, at Vanessa. Then, a simple sentence. He's okay. Eleanor put her hand to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Vanessa fell to her knees, sobbing. Bailey, The dog who had been patiently waiting gently wagged his tail. And somewhere, a newborn baby has just received a second chance at life. If you have followed this far, you are a very compassionate person. Not everyone has the patience to listen to a story of compassion, sacrifice, and true miracles in this life. But the story isn't over yet. What will happen to Leo? What will happen to Bailey? And can a broken heart be healed? Leave your comments, because sometimes it's the stories we share that change someone's life. And get ready, because the next chapter will be so captivating. Do you believe that every ending is a beginning? Leo, the boy who was once abandoned in the cold, is now sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. Vanessa sobbed, hugging her child tightly as if afraid of losing him again. Eleanor smiled, gently saying, "She fought like a warrior, and so do you." Vanessa's family, after moments of anger, finally chose to forgive and accompany her. Because love is not about not making mistakes, but knowing how to heal. Bailey did not understand why people looked at him with admiration. The videos of him saving Leo spread all over America. But the greatest reward was not fame, but a home. Eleanor bent down to stroke his head, gently saying, "From now on, you will not wander anymore, Bailey." And from there, Bailey became a therapy dog in the hospital, bringing love to those who needed it most. For Leo, Dr. Adrian Wells not only saved a child's life, but also saved himself. For the first time in a year, he was no longer afraid to step into the operating room. His past failures did not define him. It was what he did next that mattered. From there, he decided to specialize in pediatric heart surgery to help other children. If you are still here, it proves that you are someone who always wants the world to be full of love. Do you think that a small action can change a life? Thank you for taking the time to join us on this emotional journey. Perhaps somewhere in your heart, a sense of compassion has been stirred. The story of Bailey, Leo, and these brave people is not just a story. It is a reminder. Kindness, no matter how small, can change a life. If you also believe that kindness has the power to spread, click like to spread these beautiful things to more people. Share this story, because who knows, somewhere there is someone who needs a ray of hope. And don't forget to leave a number from 0 to 10 to let us know how you rate this story. But wait, are you curious about the next inspiring story? A story that will make you think, make you emotional, and maybe will change the way you look at life forever. Stay, because soon a new journey awaits you.